Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is, wherever you are right now. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon area. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like Jimmy Moglia here, my old-time friend, about who he is again as a unique one-of-a-kind individual, and he is a unique one-of-a-kind individual. He really is, and you'll find that out. He's been on the show a number of times in the past, and I can't resist having him back on again because he's always got something new and interesting going on. And I'm not polishing the apple because you're really interesting and delightful, okay? So we decided to talk about what's the topical issues as of December 10, 2018. What issues are topical? There's so many things going on in the world, in our country, that we can look at because they are topical. There's so much going on, so much, particularly with the internet and all those kinds of communications going on. And you have so many interesting things going on. So I just don't know where to start, but we'll start in the first half about who you are because there are viewers who haven't seen you before. And I'll ask you some of the same questions, and I asked you years ago, and you better be careful and not lie to me because we'll get after you.
I will attempt not to change the story, although the temptation is great.
Okay. My personal stuff, I've done it so many times, so we won't do my personal stuff. We're talking about Jimmy. If I were to ask your best friend.
You ask me, usually you put this question at the end, but you know it's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a best friend. Well, I have many friends, but none that I can say, oh, he is the best.
Uh-huh.
Each one has quite a bit to offer, and I do not rate them according to their capability of offering something,
sure,
but on whether there is what can be somewhat generally described the chemistry or a certain sensation or a perception that the guy is worth talking with.
Do you have a good friend among your friends that you can ask, if I would ask him or her, what do you think of Jimmy? Who is Jimmy?
I think you would get given, assuming but not given. There may be a range of people who can answer your question. You would probably get a range of very different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So they would not be able to, not because I'm particularly special at all, but it would. Each person is judged different by other people, just in the same way that we judge people differently. So I would hesitate even to quote a friend, say talk to him because you'll find out who I am, because two different people will probably give you two different answers.
Well, why don't you tell me who you are? I don't know. In a few words.
I don't know why, but when you asked me that,
mm-hmm.
it came to mind my resume. There was a time when I was a bit of a, whatever, I would say radical, I don't know. But anyway, you know, resumes.
That's a good start. You're radical?
Yes, I still am. On resumes, you usually ask very silly questions. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, right? So
mm-hmm.
on my strength, I have an unquenched and inextinguishable passion for what is utterly, totally, and incontrovertibly useless.
This is the shortest interview I've ever had. It's going to be over in about 2 seconds.
But of course, and then this was weaknesses, and I always wrote, take your pick. So self-definition is not a good way to go. I'm just like a run-of-the-mill person in terms of likes and dislikes, probably more dislikes than likes.
Perhaps we should start with your involvement with Shakespeare through the years.
Yes, my involvement, thank you. This is a subject on which, again, you probably would attire your audience to an exceedingly high degree. But
And 40 pounds is the weight of that latest tome that you did of
4
Shakespeare?
pounds. 4 pounds.
4 pounds.
4 pounds. My involvement in Shakespeare is not academic. It came out of my first, I had 3 lives. My first life was as a musician. Then when I got my so-called education under the belt, I was employed by a large corporation. Then I opened mine, and then my third life, which is now probably the last, will be as a writer. I'm not writer. Writer is such an overall word that, I write quite a bit. But my interest in Shakespeare, which then led me to compile, better saying, this dictionary, as well as a dictionary about the same style, about the Dante's Divine Comedy, Dante's Shakespeare of Italy, so to speak.
Yes.
The impetus, the starting point, the fire was when I was working for a large corporation. I was working for a large corporation. I had quite a good title. Title, usually people measure people at a title. I don't. But anyway, I was.
And you were working in some countries?
I was. Yes, I was the international marketing manager for this company.
Yes.
And so many years go by, so I can criticize without being probably offending anyone. But anyway, often there were corporate meetings, and I had to sit down on these corporate meetings and listen to, for even longer than me, people talking about endlessly, and saying something they using very long time and what I call the managerese in order to answer or to say something very simple. So while I was coming back from one of these long meetings, I had with me one of the Shakespeare's play, which is Richard III, and I came
Shakespeare's play?
Yeah, King Richard III. I came across a quotation that perfectly embodied my thoughts, but much better said, because Shakespeare is Shakespeare, not Jimmy Mumley, of course. And so I said, there must be a dictionary that connects situations in daily life to the perfect or the most accurate, the most apropos Shakespearean quotation. I looked for it extensively. I can say almost in all major European countries that have an English library, particularly in London.
How many Shakespeares were there?
Oh, and you got me to an era where I refuse to be an expert because I know nothing. Because of course the personality of the historic personality is so great, so enormous, that it has given rise to various schools, like factions. There is a faction that are interested whether Shakespeare was real Shakespeare. There is Shakespeare whether Shakespeare. There's a faction that discusses whether Shakespeare was Marlowe, and so on and so on. Yes. That I have no expertise whatsoever. I hate to call it expertise. My only interest is in identifying the psychological, poetical, and the verbal connection between specific Shakespearean lines and a situation that people can encounter every day. Hence the title of my book, as I said, my dictionary, my 4 pounds dictionary, Your Daily Shakespeare, an arsenal of verbal weapons to drive your friends into action and your enemies into despair.
And just the title of it, I'm going to despair. I've glanced at it and I've read some of it.
There are so many. It's useful. Furthermore, there are some way that reading, irrespective of whether it is Shakespeare or anyone else, reading has a way, even a not very good book, you always can get something out of it. But Shakespeare, almost indirectly and without consciousness, inspire a certain way of thought and way of expressing oneself, which would be different if one did not have this exposure. And
how many languages do you have?
I speak Spanish to God, French to men, Italian to women, and German to my horse.
That's it. I'm leaving again.
But no, the German is bad because I like very much German language, but I'm not using it anymore. One of my sons works in Germany. I need to go there and see him. But when I've been a few times, I said, I used to speak German more because it was necessary for my corporate job. But now it's so. Therefore, when I say I speak German to my horse, it's not the fault of the horse that I don't know the German. It's just that it's not so much necessary as the others. At least for me when I go to Europe.
And why did you leave the corporate job?
For the same reason why I started the dictionary. No, because the corporate environment, of course, it is necessary to have some kind of order and style, and I'm the last person to have to criticize the world, I'm just saying. But there are cases or issues. The corporation is almost like a small nation, and depending on the political wind, various people come out to the forefront who do a lot of good and many who do a lot of harm. Usually, at least this is my experience and impression, those who do a lot of harm are those who are usually more arrogant. And usually those who are more arrogant, because they have nothing else to portray but their arrogance, when they express themselves in a way that I couldn't take anymore, so I left.
Okay. So when and where were you born?
I was born in Italy. I was born in the town of Turin, which may lead us to the business of the chocolate factory I was telling you about. And there was so many years ago that I don't care to remember. But and then I grew up in a essentially dual speaking, French-Italian speaking area. Besides the dialect where I was there,
French and Italian. Mm-hmm.
And then after my studies, while I was studying, I started playing the guitar, and I will send you my musical wishes.
Okay.
And I became very passionate about that type of music at the time, which was called country music, still is. But the country music of when I learned it was not the same country music of today. And also I have changed tastes too. But at the time when you are 16, 17, 18...
Country music? You mean American country music?
American country music.
You are so weird.
Well, this I take it as a compliment, Keep Portland weird, keep Jimmy weird, And so, because I liked it so much, and it was so beautiful at the time, I spent, I can say, about maybe at least 6 months. It's true, but I isolating myself, and with a small tape recorder to take away the obviously, clearly impossible Latin accent, which would make singing in the country and western song ridiculous. So, anyway, at the end of this self-training, I call it self-training, I participated into a contest, singing contest. I won it, and so I started my quote-unquote first activity was begun there. But I played all over the place, but at the same time I was going to school. So I had vacations. I had maybe 2 months in the winter, and then 2 or 3 months in the summer.
And then where were you going to school then?
Genoa, in Italy.
Yes, okay.
And so I did that for approximately 10 years. Then finally, when I got my degree, I said, what am I going to do next? So I went to, and it sounds funny, but at the time there was no internet. So I assumed, because all these beautiful cowboy songs were connected with the West, I said, I must go and see what the West looks like. So, and that's how I could jumping many steps. That's how I ended up in Oregon, which I found out is not the place for country, because yes, Memphis and Nashville are the places. But it was too late, and I love the country, and I love the mountain.
What was your favorite country music at that time? One or two. You remember any songs that you learned?
No, the cowboy songs I remember none, because when I started playing in cruises or in resorts, I no longer played I just played classical American music, and so yes, there was still some country song, what we can be roughly define country and western song, but we're more already on the line of general acceptable light music that people like to listen to at the time. My only advantage, or rather my only characteristic, was that compared to the American people that were bringing back to Europe at the time to sing, it was very cheap. So that's and that is usually not a bad thing to have. But it was good. It was good. As I mentioned before the show, through the musical greetings that I put up on the web, I reconnected with one musician friend of mine who is now still in Italy, and that was good. Every now and then we established this connection.
Recently you connected with him?
Excuse me?
Recently?
Yeah, just actually, he wrote me an email today.
Oh.
So I'm going to go to him on the weekend.
Long friendships. Huh?
A long, well, I hadn't seen him probably at least 30, 40 years, but but still remain in contact. Because I played in several bands, and he was one of the bands we played several times.
Do you have a religious preference today?
My views on the issue have changed with time. I'm essentially an agnostic, but I do feel that what we call morality. Now, to talk about morality, usually you sounds very heavy, or there is always danger to be a hypocrite.
Sure.
But I believe that morality, apart from any consideration of Christianity, was a derivation of Greek philosophy, came down from Plato. So when you say the morality that came out from Plato, Aristotle, which was translated in block, almost in block, into the Christian tradition, let's call it Christian tradition, irrespective of whether it is Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox.
Did you have a religion when you were a child?
Yes, I grew up being a Roman Catholic, served Mass, and sung in the church. I know that you're going to bless me, but I'm impermeable to blessing.
Impermeable blessing.
But what I was saying is that the concept of morality is not something that comes necessarily down through religion. It came up, well, if you can define the Platonists, the Greeks, even the concept of the Trinity, which certainly not something that would interest many people. But anyway, the concept of the Trinity was first established by Plato, but not in the context of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. In a different way. It's not necessary to go into it, partly because I don't remember even the reasoning. But the main point is that morality is a concept which is not necessarily attributable exclusively to religion. So you have two choices in life. Either you adjust your conduct to comply with morality, or you adjust your morality to comply with your conduct. And so within the limits of the weakness that any person has, I tend to adjust to use my morality to control my conduct, as opposed to change my morality to adjust my conduct. You see.
Are you a moral human being today?
I do not know. But the reason I said this, I make this point about it, is because normally this has not been, I think, much discussed. Not only in the mainstream media, because the mainstream media is not interested in morality, it's interested in you buying something or me buying something. But what I was going to say, this issue of morality, of adapting the morality to fit your conduct, was prevalent, became very, very prevalent in the 60s, the 1960s, when, for example, you know what you heard about Margaret Mead? Do you know Margaret?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Margaret Mead was one of the sexual liberators who said that, it's only adultery is a Western issue, but if you're really, she went to Samoa, whatever the islands in the Pacific, and she came back and wrote a book that say, well, the Samoans, they don't have any sexual inhibitions. This was a total lie. And so, but then somebody completely contradicted her and so forth. But then if you look at her life, because she herself was plain adulteress. So she had to modify the moral to justify her conduct. The other great, I would say, example of a similar behavior is, of course, Freud, and his Oedipus complex. I think it's absurd. It's absurd to think that people have an Oedipus concept. But then you find out, you look through his biographies, and not only the ones that praise him, but the ones that are more. I try to dig deeply, and he was essentially a pervert. So it was necessary for him to convince himself that all people are perverts, so that he could sell his remedy. So I hope I've answered your question.
Was there anything of value in what his belief was, in his knowledge, and what such that is held on for so many years, Freudian, and what does that mean?
Oh, yeah.
It must be something about it that has it worthwhile.
There was a confluence of several factors that made this possible. One is that he had good backers. I shouldn't say this, but I hope he belonged to a sect that traditionally has very good backers. And number one. And number two, the idea of finding a reason for deviating from what is an accepted standard and go and get away with it is something that appeals to humanity even before Freud. And before Freud, there was the confession. You go to the confessor and say, "I've done this wrong." Okay, well, don't do it again. Do some prayers, and that was free. But with Freud, he said, "Oh, you do this? You do it again, because you are fighting your inhibitions, and give me quite a bit of money in order for me to give you the freedom to do it again, what you really should not do, if you were." So it was the reason to answer your question. It was an appealing philosophy, if you like, because it enabled people to do what they didn't like, get away with it, as long as you pay the psychiatrist. I can see that. I don't know whether I interpret your smile as skepticism. It does not mean that the unconscious doesn't exist, but the unconscious existed well before Freud. So he elaborated in such a way that it would good for his wallet, as well, which people like things that do harm to themselves. Look at what people eat.
The people that you, as you think about it, who admire, look up to, it's hard to put it that way, from history or from the past, of any people alive today that you rather admire for some reason or other.
In most recent,
are these people moral people?
Nobody knows what goes into somebody's mind, but their behavior, their outward behavior, as far as you can judge it, is a pretty good guide of what they are. Not only that, but I think that there will become a long conversation, but the complex of the physiognomy, the behavior, what they say, how they say it, when they say it, and the facial expression gives a very good idea of what the type of a person is. At least this is my experience. I may be wrong. Sometimes I made mistakes, because we are perfect. So to answer your question, as I said before, you asked me several times, in recent times, and it's very unusual, because you say you can only admire one person, but I've been a great admirer of President Jimmy Carter.
Hey.
Because
I've heard that lately, it seems, in recent years, from more people.
Okay, because he has shown in his behavior, in his family, in his pronouncement, in his efforts, and in his, I would say, significant humility when he speaks about himself, to be the type of person you would like to have as a friend and as a leader. And that, you would say, how about the others? I am sure there are good things about that. Maybe I didn't like too much of the Bushes, including the one who maybe now he's in heaven. But Bill Clinton defines himself. They're liars. I'm sorry, I shouldn't hope. Lie. It's a making of lying an art. So.
Well, then, what is Trump? Is he a moral human being?
I don't want to judge people. You ask me the characteristics by way why I like people. I do not know. I think that, as many have already said, Trump got elected as a reaction to everything that was wrong. And in the same way, Trump is the embodiment of what in Europe was Brexit for England. So I cannot pass judgment, it doesn't really matter, but I cannot pass judgment on his morality because I haven't followed his biography, nor I would care very much. But the fact that he was elected was a reaction of the same type why the English voted for Brexit, voted for leaving the European Union.
Why did they do that? You're leading me.
No. I would say that half of the people who voted know only half of what they voted on. But and if they knew the other half, they probably would be completely lost. I'm just exaggerating. But the main reason for why Brexit came about in England is immigration. There is immigration, not necessarily immigration only from third world countries, so to speak, but the structure of the European Union is such as to have created in practice, a lowering of the standard for the middle class, and to the point that eventually it would explode, as it exploded these days in France. Mm-hmm. And as I was mentioning before the show, one of my articles, and I will publish it probably tomorrow, the day after, they can go on my site, but it's already one of the sites of circulation, high circulation. What happened is, in this particular article, I translated an interview with an Italian truck driver, okay, and who was, here's his story. He started driving a truck in Italy before the European Union. So it was going along for a while. Mm-hmm. And then the European Union came about, and of course you had to compete with all the truck drivers throughout the European Union. So the thing that they started doing is, for example, they had to run faster, so that they even to break the speed limit when they could. And the other thing that they did was they did not tied up. He was transporting iron rods, those big iron rods that come out of the foundries, and. So he described a couple of accidents, that deadly accident happened due to the new policy. And then one day, the boss calls him into the office and says, "You have to meet this guy. His last name is difficult to pronounce, but we'll give him, we'll promise him his first name, which is only 2 syllables. And he's here to help you." And so he asked me, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, the company for which we are transporting, they said that we are too expensive. So I will make it short because there are very intermediate steps. He had to teach this guy, he came from Poland in this case, he had to do his job, to drive his truck in Italy, and then while he developed this friendship with this Polish driver, he found out he was paying 40% of his own salary, of the Italian driver. Not only that, but in order, he asked this new Polish driver to register himself, not as an employee, but as a startup company, an entrepreneur. And then eventually, the interview is quite long, but the bottom line is eventually the company for which he was transporting the rods moved operations to Eastern Europe, so they didn't anymore the truck drivers, and so he was left without a job. I hope I haven't lost you. But the bottom line is, with the advent of the European Union, there was an immediate lowering of salaries because people coming from the East were wanted to take jobs at any cost, and that made it impossible for the local people to maintain their situation. And so this is why I said at the beginning that Brexit came about because of immigration. Because in England it's easier to see it because it's an island.
Yes.
So you can see the pressure at the borders, on the other side of the channel. You can see the enclaves that are no longer British and so forth. You know, in the last, as I was reading, in the last 10 or 15 years, there have been 8 million people who have gone into England, and 8 million is a large number for a small island.
So Brexit was not a good idea for ordinary people.
No, Brexit is the separation of England from the European Union.
Yeah.
And it was at least it has been, for the majority, considered a good idea. Primarily, you asked me why they did it, to put a curb on immigration. Whether it is good or not, we don't know. It's a large problem. It's the same thing here. But see, the problem, the way I see it, and of course you correct me if I'm wrong. I tell you, in the job that I do now, I have a lot of interaction with Spanish-speaking people, and
the job you're doing now is interpreting?
Yes, and so not all the time, part-time.
Sure.
And so it is natural. You know, very good people, but you have this pushed no border immigration recreates the same conditions for why there was a Brexit in England. The other countries cannot do it too easily because they are part of the continent. So, and you can see it even in California, there's been a tsunami of people coming in, and all the work that was done by America has been done now because they are paid less. So gradually moving north. If you look at the construction sites of houses, look how many Americans there are. Not very many. So it's an intractable problem because all these people have a right to have a decent life, but they are accepting much lesser pay because when a person falls below a certain limit of income, then the government, thank God, comes in and pays them for them.
What about the people in these other countries that want to come into England, for example, and they want a better standard of living and have a better life? What about their situation? Do we have any empathy for them?
Of course. The only question that, in fact, I'm not saying that. I'm just discussing the point, bringing out the point, but not saying that it is wrong. The point that has to be, I would say, addressed is at what cost to the ordinary person living in the host country can this phenomenon be acceptable? At what cost?
That's the question.
And that's a question that I don't think it has been addressed because, let me face it, this displacement of people in mass will not affect the people who are 3, 4, 5 million, 10, $1 billion a year of income. For it's indifferent, they could be. But for the people who have to make a living in what once was called the middle class is an issue because somebody must pay for this, and usually it's paid either in taxes or in lowering salaries. So there is no solution that I know of. But I just want to talk about the problem. And the story, because the interview with the truck driver was an example of that. He found from a full-time truck driver, he gave to the point that he had to be fired because someone else would be able to do his job at 40% of his salary. But this is reflected all over the world, all over Europe. Just on Sunday, I was speaking with a friend of mine. Tell me the time, but anyway, I was speaking with a friend of mine in Italy. His son is working in Spain, in Barcelona, and he is in what is called the host industry. So he works in hotels. It's a hotel chain. They only keep it 6 months in one position. They change it in 6 months, so they don't have to pay benefits. They don't have to pay for insurance. So the phenomenon is not limited to England. It's a worldwide phenomenon.
Well, greed. Bottom line, it all comes down to greed. And is it a natural occurrence in Homo sapiens to be greedy beyond what other species need in order to stay alive?
Yes, very true. Except that there is not there, or probably could not be for a long time, a standard by which you can measure greed, because the neoliberal, which is the neoliberal philosophy, which is we'll call it turbo capitalism, suggests or says if somebody can gather as much income as he can, that's part of the beauty of capitalism, because of the system, turbo capitalism, because he deserves it. So at that point, where do you draw the line? I'm not saying it is good, I'm not saying it is bad, but that is how it works. Of course, I'm saying something obvious, but when you attempt to put limits to this, people are accused of being unrealistic. And the philosophy has percolated through the people. There's no more left these days.
Oh, is it a culture or something about a particular people that has them overall come across as being too greedy or selfish at the expense of fellow human beings?
This is such a generalized and humanitarian question, because you show me this, that there is no answer to that. There is no answer to human nature. I think, you cannot say, anybody who tries to modify human nature should be probably concerned.
Well, I think I am concerned, and I think all humans should be concerned about what's going on.
Yes,
and
concern,
why.
yes, but another way of looking at it, is to consider the currents that have made this possible.
Yes.
Okay. On a large basis, it is possible to do it. They are hypotheses, they are not conclusions, they are not dogmas, so anybody can criticize it. But I do believe that the birth of, the development of what I call turbo capitalism was a result of, maybe wrong, very subjective, of 3 elements that began to develop at the end of the 1960s and the beginning of the 70s. There were 3 points. The first one was the so-called student revolution, of which we had the echoes here too. And out of the student revolution came the philosophical idea, or we'll call it philosophical idea, but a general idea that the working class give up, or including the students, give up their workers' rights in exchange for first sexual liberation and degeneracy. No, that was the number one. Not in order of importance, but there's one. In fact, where are the unions? Today we see the effect. The second one was the 1967 war, because the 1967 war, which you may remember, was an attempt, the first attempt of what I call of Israel, or what is called the Jewish establishment, to achieve what they called Eretz Israel, the Greater Israel, which most people do not realize it, but includes Israel, Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, part of Turkey, the Sinai, and most of Iraq.
So Persia.
Excuse me?
Persia?
Oh no, Persia is not part of Greater Israel, but the other regions.
Well, the new borders that define Israel as a result of the Balfour Declaration.
Yes, but I was
talking about the broad.
See, in the broad context, in the Talmud, the Torah, whatever they are, those are the countries they would say not Persia. Persia was outside of the Greater Israel.
Yeah.
But anyway, The 1967 war was a test because, as you remember, or as people know, the United Nations, including the U.S., passed a resolution that they had to give up the land which they occupied. You know, go military occupied. They occupied, but they didn't. So at this point, the way was open. Is if they can do this, if we can do whatever we want, then we can do whatever we want. And the third point, and I'm sorry if this is, maybe correct me, in 1970, I looked at this very carefully. So very carefully, I mean, I read, I wasn't there, so I cannot say. Sure. I'm relying on what I read. In 1954, a Jewish historian who wrote on both on the Encyclopedia Britannica and on the Jewish Encyclopedia, a long statement about the appalling treatment of Jews in Germany, but there was no indication of number of people killed, nor gas chamber or anything like that. But in 1972, that's where the Holocaust was born. Now, some people may say, you know, to say something, to have question, even say something about the Holocaust is dangerous these days. But anyway, it was born in 1972. It was born in New York, the term Holocaust. And the Holocaust has been I would say, the cover used in order to hide under the umbrella of the Holocaust all other injustices, including the wars, incredible wars in the Middle East. They destroyed 2 countries, Iraq completely destroyed, Libya completely destroyed, Syria almost completely destroyed, and all the injustices, you know, and the killing of the Palestinians and all this stuff, of which I follow because I have a friend who's in Gaza. So, and I follow with the pictures that sometimes don't come on the media, of course. And so these 3 elements: the sexual revolution, the Holocaust, and the third one that I mentioned before, have created the condition that then eventually led to everything else and to the conditions that we are now. So I attribute it to that.
So the next World War, is that going to break out from the Middle East?
I will be the last one to predict it. But there has not been a world war. But certainly there's been sufficiently war to understand that this is a cause. There are some causes behind it. It's not just...
it's not just in that Middle East there, but it's in other parts of the world too, and in the Philippines.
Well, local issues have always existed, you know. The Philippines, I don't know too much about it because I couldn't say. But I'm not the only one to think the historical reason they have led to conditions now where you have even the United States trying to reassert its hegemony worldwide. They are immensely successful at it. Oh, well,
it's the American empire.
Yes, it's an American empire, and
but Chris Hedges is talking about it's waning pretty fast.
Yes,
Chris Hedges.
Yes, I know Chris Hedges. Although I start to like him. That's fine. That's okay. But
he's kind of hard to take for some people.
The prediction, it's like Mark Twain. He said, the news about my death has been greatly exaggerated. But the same thing can be said about the United States, because when you look around, Russia seems to have confined it herself into her own huge territory, and now it's been attacked by I would say silly reason, beyond silly, beyond ridiculous. But until these movements do not come from one day to the next unless you have a world war. So it is possible that the empire may gradually or not vanish, but reduce, just in the same way as the Roman Empire did. But it's difficult to predict it, and nobody can say exactly. What is ridiculous, however, is the guy like Mike Pompeo who says the United States must remain the number one country in the world. It's good for you, say. Most people around the world now question may take it with a pinch of salt.
Fake news.
Yes, fake news. This is why it is difficult to criticize Trump, because Trump did maybe unwantedly, maybe it was luck or something, but he invented fake news, and which everybody know about it. But for a concept to filter through the masses, through the millions, there must be someone who makes it popular. So this idea of the fake news, as I think, I hope, I trust, has convinced millions, finally, that what is written on the newspaper or what comes up on corporate television is fake news.
Well, it wouldn't take much more time to see a full blossoming of a Fourth Reich.
No, I don't think so. No, no.
Okay.
First of all, National Socialism was we cannot talk into that because we would go for hours. But no, I don't think he has the. I think you are, from your point of view, I don't know, we haven't spoken recently about your viewpoint, but National Socialism was a combination of revenge for the treatment in World War I, which was really poor.
Versailles.
The fact of the destruction of essentially it was, I would say, a brothel, the conversion of the Republic of Weimar after World War I, what I call essentially an open-air brothel. So, and the fact that we wanted to kill Germany economically because of the sanction and so forth. So they completely changed their monetary system, and in a short time.
And I'm wondering about the personalities, and back to Freud again, I guess. Considering, I think respected authorities agree that Donald Trump has a severe personality disorder, and I wonder if we were to examine Adolf Hitler, did he have a personality disorder too, to have him take his country and his people in that direction? And this is what Trump really is doing here in America, taking American people with fake news and their behavior, not just their, but personality disorder that is rare.
I do not know. I'm not qualified to judge. I'm not qualified to judge because to compare the National Socialism to the conditions now, I don't think it's appropriate because
the National Socialism as it was practiced in Germany. And Spain and Italy.
Yes, it was a type of regime which at the time was of appeal to the people that lived under it, simply because it was a reaction to what was there before. In Germany, the inflation was about 500% from one day to the next. So people just could not physically live. So something had to be done in order to change dramatically the conditions that made this life impossible. I'm not passing judgment, positive or negative, because even in Italy it was the same thing. There was, after the Mussolini came to power, because it was impossible to live, and so I think we are not in the situation now.
Have you seen any photographs of I want to say Il Duce, of Trump? Sometimes he has that arms folded and he has the look on his face.
Okay, that he is not particularly likable, I will not dispute. The question is, what is behind it? And behind it, from the popular point of view, was a reaction to the status quo. Now, who knows what are the inputs? He's surrounded by people you want him to have wars, there's no question. So
he's invited those people.
That is a question I do not know and I cannot answer, because you invite those people, but there are sometimes that they make him an offer he cannot refuse. So it is possible these people are there. Some of the people, which I find absolutely horrible, are there because there is no other way to go.
Some of those people, every darn one of them, it seems to me, and they keep changing the positions or the names of the people who occupy those administrative positions in the administrative state. Those are all extremists, right-wingists, or fascists, or neo-fascists.
No, they call them neoconservatives. they are the lay equivalent.
Neoliberal.
Or neoliberal. They are the lay equivalent of the dispensationalist fundamentalists that or the Jews for Christ. There's a group called Jews. So they are the equivalent of that. So I'm not. It's difficult to defend or to even to judge. I'm just saying that the reason, in order to find the reason for the we're getting close to the end.
We only have a couple of minutes, but I wanted to talk about the history of Italy beginning in China.
Yes.
What the heck's that about?
No. Because
That's
next week I will record my first episode of the history of Italy. And I don't know how many will there be, but I have to start at some point, not with the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reason it's happening in China is this, because the emperor of China, the empire of China, was attacked by the Mongolians. They funny Chinese Oriental names or another. But anyway, they're essentially Mongolians.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in order to defend themselves, they built the Wall of China, right? They built the Wall of China.
The Mongols.
But that was enough. They were overthrew the Wall of China, were on the other side. Eventually, the empire organized itself to put them out. At this point, the Huns, as we call them now, the Huns could no longer go into China, but they had all this. They only went to the west, so they traveled to the steppes, and so we had the Han invasion, into Europe, and that's why various. You have to watch my episode, but various events that followed the transformation of the Roman Empire into eventually a Western Roman Empire was due to the necessity to defend themselves from the Huns, who were coming back because they couldn't invade China anymore.
The Mongols.
It's better to call them Huns because Mongols.
And then China was below Mongolia.
Yes, but yes, of course, yes, geographically, yes. Anyway, watch my program when it comes out, and I'll be able to give a more coherent explanation. But essentially, it is true. And one of the things that came up out of that, and if you look at when in Europe, you look at especially in Italy, all the towns which are still from founded in the Middle Ages or Roman times, and mostly in the Middle Ages, they're on top of hills, because it was the easiest way for people to discourage people from going up, because there were no cars. So, you had to be quite a bit organized on hills and with the walls around it.
Mm-hmm.
Started as a defense against the Huns.
Well, listen, we're about running out of time. Are nation states obsolete?
No, because nationality means culture, nationality means tradition, nationality means, frankly, people who have a certain common characteristics that have been acquired and developed through hundreds and hundreds of years. To throw them away for some kind of globalistic mongrelization of the world is, to me, a disaster. Because I wouldn't like to have all the Frenchmen be in Italy, or all the Germans being in France. I would like to have Germany, France, Italy, even Switzerland, Denmark, England.
You're from the old school.
Yes.
Well, we better wind down now, because they're going to yell at me unless we stop. And we didn't even take a break. We got so involved here. But I want you to look at the camera.
Yes.
And say whatever is on your mind, what we talked about, anything else. It's you and
Sure.
the viewers.
Well, thank you for inviting me. We have the subject that we cover here, we've covered in this, are general, of course, and we cannot go into details. But I always invite my readers or viewers not to just rely on what has been said here, but to consider it a starting point for your research. Because today, even online, it is possible to find a wealth of information, sometimes on both sides of the issue.
Too much of a wealth.
Okay, that will leave you more informed, perhaps with no solutions in mind, but at least it's better to know the problem than ignore it.
Very good.
That's it.
I've enjoyed you all over again.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's always a pleasure.
So let's have a couple of PSAs, and we got to tell you about the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. Without the ACLU, our liberties would be down the tubes here in America, because our civil liberties are disappearing because of the influence of the extreme right wing or that hidden operation. Okay, we tell you about the Alliance for Democracy. That's a national website. The Alliance for Democracy is a great organization that's working for America toward having a more true democracy than the kind of kleptocracy that's going on now in this country today. And now I want to tell you about ending corporate personhood. Oh man, that's the most important thing going on now in our country, ending corporate personhood. Go to that website, move to amend.org, and because corporations are not persons and money is not speech, so we can amend the Constitution to end corporate personhood. And let's say good night now. Okay, thanks for watching. Remember KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too, and you too, and you too in the control room. Good night.